Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, sometimes that quest to be the best can be more all-consuming than most of us even know or understand, and if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt. I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals, and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And you know, if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do, because let's face it, you're listening right now. Please subscribe, hit that button, give us the old 5-star rating, and find us basically on your podcast platform of choice. We're pretty much everywhere, over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google. It's all good, and plus we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel, so if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. We're on the Facebook, we're on the Twitter, we're on the Instagram, we're on the Letterboxd, and we're on the TikTok for all sorts of fun updates. At where else? In the seats. But also, don't hesitate to I'm stumbling over my words here because this is important to me. But finally, please pay us a visit over at intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. Because, you know, we love to watch it and write about it and talk it. We love it even more when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please pay us a visit. On this episode, we got a real interesting one. It is a documentary which is with our friends over at the Hot Docs Bloor Cinema right now, and it is called Love Charlie, the rise and fall of chef Charlie Trotter, who, if you don't know, Charlie Trotter was a high-level chef who revolutionized American cuisine and really changed the game for restaurants and restaurateuring and so many people. His name is definitely put out there with the likes of Anthony Bourdain and Wolfgang Puck and so many others, Emeril Lagasse. But this guy was obsessed with success and obsessed with fame and obsessed with being, not necessarily fame, but obsessed with being the best. And he really was a fascinating character, especially in this documentary. And we had the unique pleasure of sitting down with the writer and director of the film, the one and only Rebecca Halperin, to talk about why she wanted to make this film, what made Charlie such a sort of a unique subject to tell this kind of story, and how she went about it all. And that's about it, because this is one of those documentaries which is fascinating to watch, to be able to get to see inside the mind of such a high-level talent like Charlie Trotter. And like I said, it is playing theatrically over at the Hot Docs Ted Rogers Bloor Cinema right now if you are here in Toronto, and it may be playing in other select locations around the country. But I also know it is coming to video on demand at the end of January. So if you don't catch it in theaters, I do recommend you catch it on video on demand. But first, enjoy our talk with Rebecca Halperin, because between you and me, it is a darn good one. But I mean, obviously, Rebecca, first off, just thank you so much for the time today, and congratulations on the film. I really loved it.
Thank you. I'm so glad.
No, I mean, I guess my first question is, walk me through the story of when you sort of centered on wanting to tell his story.
It's funny. I got really lucky in that I was hired to direct this film.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Our producer, Renee Frigo, had launched an olive oil company in the 90s called Lucchini Olive Oil that Charlie actually discovered. And he brought the olive oil with him onto Oprah. So you can imagine what that did to her business. And he championed it for years. And when he passed away, she wanted to pay homage to him. So she, I was recommended to her through a mutual friend, and the rest was history. It's funny because I grew up in the same hometown as Charlie Trotter. I went to the same high school as Charlie Trotter.
Really?
My mom was a food writer in Chicago at the time that Charlie Trotter was sort of at his peak. And so I knew everything, that the media was telling me about Charlie Trotter, but I really didn't know who the man was. And so when I was interviewed to direct the film, that was definitely an important piece of the story I wanted to tell, was like, who is this guy really, not just this enigmatic figure that the media was portraying.
No, I mean, I guess that dovetails into my next question. I mean, how would you get brought on to a job like this? I mean, is the research aspect of being making something like this sort of done for you? Like, do they just open up a door and say, "Here's the vault, here's all the archive," or do you have to sort of really start digging?
Yeah, well, there was buy-in that we had to get still. The family, Charlie's family, his mother and his sister, and Charlie's first wife, Lisa, who really held the key to a lot of the archival materials that you see in the film. They needed to approve me and give me and sign off on me before they were going to participate. And I don't blame them, So, I managed to convince them that they should partner, that we should all work together and that they should agree to participate. And they did. And they gave me carte blanche to Charlie's whole archival history, including more than 400 postcards and letters that he wrote before he opened the restaurant, all of his newspaper clippings, so much of the material of the ephemera from the restaurant itself. And so, yeah, I mean, the digging is not done for me. I ended up starting to dig myself. But we were lucky in one respect in that we started production on day one of COVID.
Oh, wow.
And that kind of created a bubble of time for us because we weren't faced with the demands of everyday life in the way that we were before, to really be able to sit down and read all the letters and really understand who Charlie was. And so, I really felt like I got a really great insight into him. And not just that way, but through, hours long conversations with Charlie's friends, his family, his former employees and coworkers. And so yeah, it was a deep dive. I'll say that.
Well, and I mean, I was so fascinated, especially in everyone that you got to talk to, because I mean, there was an obvious love for him there, but I could feel the but sort of hanging over it as well. And I mean, and particularly the family, because I'm kind of curious, because obviously we've seen other documentaries about other sort of high level chefs before, and they're always, we see the genius, we see the brilliance, but we always have to see sort of the cost of that at the same time. Like, were they on board for that?
Yeah. And that was sort of integral for me. I wasn't going to sign on if it was just going to be this laudatory sort of hagiography. That was not what I was interested in telling. I needed to tell a 360-degree view of his career because so much of the what I'll call the less savory bits of him and his life were already in the public sphere, right? And the whole trick of the movie, in my opinion, was to contextualize those less savory bits so that the audience could come away at least understanding a little bit, maybe more, why he was the way he was, why he did things the way he did things. And also, I think, too, where the public was misled in some respects by the media's portrayal of him, because the media didn't know, and neither did a lot of people in Charlie's life, some of the demons that he was dealing with personally. The benefit of the doubt is something that gets lost the higher you climb on the hill, right?
Oh, for sure.
And when you're at the top, nobody's going to cut you any slack for anything. And Charlie had an inoperable brain aneurysm. I mean, that affects your personality. That affects who you are. That's not to say that he wasn't difficult, domineering, tyrannical, and all those things. But at the end of the day, you have to feel for the guy when he can't get 3 Michelin stars after running a 3 Michelin star level restaurant for 20 plus years. Why? Because he doesn't have the faculties to be able to reinvent and stay, invigorated the way that someone who was healthy might have been able to do.
Did having people like Wolfgang and Emerald to talk to, from your point of view, did that help give perspective to just sort of the peak of the genius, but also sort of the pain when you can't when you have that moment where you have to pivot and you can't?
Wolfgang Puck is an interesting chef because for him, the 3 Michelin star sort of goal was never something that he strived to attain, but he was able to sort of articulate what that must be like for someone who does make it their life's dream to achieve that. And it's painful. It's terribly painful. I mean, Emeril Lagasse was one of Charlie's best friends. And I think that the person that you see show up for Emeril in our film, he's so soulful and deep and emotional about Charlie in a way that, like, you know, you can see that it hurts him. And I think a lot of chefs actually didn't want to participate in the movie on some level because I think it cut awfully close to that thing that they're running away from.
Right.
You know, in their everyday life. And I know that for Grant Achatz, who we profile in the film, who is the owner of the restaurant Alinea in Chicago and was one of Charlie's proteges, I think the journey that we show Grant Achatz going on, which is very much the same journey that Charlie went on when he came on the scene, is interesting because now Grant is fearing for his own future in the same way that Charlie did back then too. You know, there will come a time when Grant Achatz will not win 3 Michelin stars. You know, it's just inevitable. It will happen. And when you spend your whole life running after that thing and you don't get it, you know, talk about soul searching. I mean, in that moment, you are dropped to your knees. And what do you do from there? For Charlie, it was the proverbial nail in his coffin, so to speak. He closed the restaurant and then died a year later.
It really feels like these high-level chefs have this laser focus on, like you said, sort of that goal of the Michelin star and just sort of that drive to get there. But what I think your film really showed quite well is like, this is like, it's a borderline madness, really, when you think about it. And I mean, I'm kind of curious, as you were talking to all these people, what drives them into that kind of situation? Because I mean, again, when you're that laser focused, like, you're not gonna, like, the blinders are only gonna go away when it's kind of too late. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the film is definitely a cautionary tale of what happens when your identity becomes consumed by your work.
Yeah.
And it always starts out as a voluntary thing. Like, you want to devote yourself 1,000,000% to what you do. And then by the end of having done that for how many years, in Charlie's case, 25, you know, you lose sight of your authentic self, your true self, which we argue in the film was a guy named Chuck, who was Chuck Trotter before he opened the restaurant. I think Charlie's psychological makeup, and I'm not a physician, so I don't know, but I know that his mother said that he had ADD, and that was very difficult for her to kind of keep him focused as a kid, and sort of, you know, calm. And you see it sort of evolve in his running as a, you know, young man, a young chef. He had to run all the time. He had this feeling that life was shorter for himself. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if there is a name for the ingredient that Charlie had that made him so almost manic, but like obsessed with the pursuit of excellence. But I'm not I'm not a psychologist, so I hesitate to put a label on it. You know, I heard through some of my interviews, was he on the spectrum? Did he have Asperger's? Was he, you know, obsessive compulsive, perfectionist, all those things. But at the end of the day, I think that he was compelled to pursue excellence in everything he did. That was his MO in life, not just in food. It was about how he brushed his teeth. It was about how he plated his 10-course tasting menus. It was about how he cleaned out the dumpsters behind the restaurant, because that was an expression of excellence, right? To have a clean alley in the back of your restaurant. So I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, we try to show I made a concerted effort to show more than I told, particularly when I knew I was not qualified to make any kind of a judgment like that.
No, and I mean, you're absolutely right. But I mean, it's one of those things where it's the kind of character that, I mean, just as a viewer of a film, we're so drawn into that kind of ideal. And I mean, bear with me because this is a bit of a jump, but I mean, I know you served as a producer on the Helter Skelter miniseries, which I absolutely love, directed by Leslie Chilcott. But I mean, I see sort of that, like, it's guys on both sides of a line, and it always kind of fascinates me to see how people can push in different directions when they're sort of sitting right on that razor edge. And it's really an interesting thing. And I'm kind of curious, for you as a filmmaker and a documentarian, what is it about those characters that draw us in as viewers?
I mean, that is not a leap at all, by the way, David. I'll just say that. Charlie Trotter would make a phenomenal character in a scripted film. And in fact, so much of his story plays like a movie. You know, there's a lot about it that does. When I interviewed Grant Achatz, who was Charlie's protege, Grant fell in love with Charlie because of his cookbooks. And he was seduced into Charlie's world through the philosophy that he was seeing in the cookbooks, through the photography, through this kind of like first expression of Charlie Trotter's genius when it came to literature and books and being able to sort of express his vision that way. And I told Grant in the interview that I did with him that I had just come off this 6-part series about Charles Manson. And I said, hearing him talk about Charlie and how he fell in love with Charlie was very much like what I heard from the Manson family when they first met Charles Manson. I mean, it had that same kind of like enigmatic cult-like sway over people. He had that. Charlie did. You know, Charlie's ex-wife, Lisa, who we feature in the film, and I spent countless hours on the phone psychoanalyzing him like you would an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, you know, who you were trying to understand because it didn't work out or whatever, you know? And he's just one of those people that is so multifaceted and had so much going on that he elicits a hunger in you to want to understand him better. And that was sort of the paradox for me of his whole life. He begged you to delve deeper into him and his world, but at the same time, people don't always have the faculties or the capacity to do that. You know, the media especially is just going to cast you in a role, and you are that person. You are the tyrant. You are the enfant terrible. You are whatever they say you are. So in coming at this movie as the director, I really wanted to be more nuanced in my approach, show more than I told, and really raise some of the questions about him and his psyche so that the audience could start, you know, putting the pieces of the puzzle together for themselves. And hopefully I could lead them to the place where I shook out ultimately on him also.
Well, and I mean, and that's the fascinating thing too, because I mean, documentary kind of allows for that. And I mean, people tend to sort of miscast the documentary form as, you know, just facts and talking heads. But it really, when it's done right, which I think you've done here, it allows for such a nuanced sort of telling of who a person was and why they were. And it allows for conversation to keep continuing on. And I mean, I'm kind of curious for you, when you set off for something like this, is that kind of the ultimate goal for you, to be able to not just tell the story, but tell it in such a way that we're really getting into the brass tacks. We're really understanding the psyche of the man, as opposed to just sort of the facts and the accomplishments of the man.
100%. I mean, I wanted to do a very deep character study of who he was. And when I was hired, one of the executive producers was pushing for me to just interview everybody and their brother in his life and all these famous chefs to do kind of a survey of Charlie Trotter's life and times. And I felt like there was so much more to his legacy than that. And what would resonate with audiences was seeing themselves sort of reflected back in Charlie. And so I really tried to show all sides and raise all the questions that when you go out to dinner after watching this movie, you're going to ask those questions of yourself too. And I think that that's why Charlie had a lot of detractors as well. He was so excellent at everything that he did. And by that, I mean, he cared so much. He poured so much love and attention into everything that he did. Looking at him almost confronts you with your own excellence, right? And like, where can you be more excellent in your own life? And no one wants to be reminded of their weaknesses,
For sure.
right? And just by virtue of being in Charlie's presence, you were on some level, and people didn't like that.
No, but you know what? I'm so glad you went the route that you did, because this could have easily fallen into sort of that cookie cutter sort of form doc that would have been successful and sold, and that would have been fine. But this took it to a different level, and it made it so much more compelling and interesting. And I mean, I think you've done a fabulous piece of work here. And just thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. You know, it's funny, David. I think audiences these days conflate like a mixed up timeline or complex timeline with artfulness.
Right.
And when the story is so good and it writes itself, you
Exactly.
need
Yeah.
to just get out of the way and let it do its thing, right? So that was my goal, and I appreciate your complimenting that. So
You
thank
don't
you.
have to over direct a story like this. You just have to make sure it stays on the rails.
That's it. That's exactly it.
But again, congrats on the work. And again, thank you for the time. I really appreciate it. Can't wait for more people to see this.
This was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.